Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Luke. This Arizona Wildcats podcast is brought to you by DraftKings, an official betting sponsor of the NFL, a partner, and they got a great deal going on. You can go there and you can throw down $1 on an NFL game, and you can get $200 going right after that. Now I am joined by Mr. Triple Double himself, Mr. Matt Muehlebach. Think about all the great players that have come through the U of A. The first one that had a triple-double was the man that I'm talking to right now.
How you doing, Mike? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Matt, and let's get down to it. Lute Olson was obviously a huge part of the fabric that is Tucson, Arizona. And before we get into a lot of the details, and I've got some anecdotes, I know you've got a lot of anecdotes. What did he mean to this city? How has this city changed since he arrived here in the mid-'80s?
Well, I mean, I'm not taking anything away from Tucson or Southern Arizona when I say this, because it's a great community. I love it. You know, I have lived here since college. But I really think the main thing he did, he really gave it an identity, and he gave the U of A a brand. And, you know, you hear East Coast people talk about Zona and, you know, just the program and the school itself. And, you know, obviously joining the Pac-10 from the WAC, I think, you know, U of A had some catching up to do. I mean, you have all those teams like UCLA and USC and, you know, with such incredible tradition in the Pac-10. And I think, you know, the teams like Arizona State or Arizona that were coming into the league were trying to find itself. Mm-hmm. And I think that, as I said, Luke gave it the brand. He gave this entire university a brand that I think is here forever.
Yeah, and what's unique about Coach Olson and what he built here is the communal environment. You go to a lot of places. I've gone to a game in Kentucky, and again, I know it's a little bit different, but it didn't have the feel that you did at an Arizona game. And I'll give you an idea. When Mike Bibby hit campus in 1996, and granted, this was before all of the recruiting services became huge and you knew kids when they're 9 years old. Once Bibby was here, I felt like I knew Mike Bibby within within a month. I knew that he didn't really socialize much. He played basketball. You knew the whole story with his background. You felt invested in the entire team. And oh, by the way, they're also whooping people down on a national basis.
Yeah, no question. And that, well, you mentioned the national basis. And, you know, that was one thing Lute did when he came in, is he played everybody. Mm-hmm. And he wanted this school. He wanted Arizona. He wanted his teams, you know, to play Duke and play Carolina and play on the road at Georgetown, at Illinois. I mean, nobody did that in the Pac-10. I mean, maybe UCLA did. I should take that back. But rarely did you see teams from even the Pac-10 or the West Coast ever do it unless it was a money game, right? They went out to sort of lose to somebody and make some money. But Arizona, he stepped it up. And you mentioned Bibby too. It's interesting. Lute, he recruited every type of player.
Right.
And he recruited McDonald's All-Americans like Mike Bibby, or Craig McMillan was his first, Sean Elliott. But he got guys like Steve Kerr. And I was talking to Channing Frye over the weekend. You know, I was laughing that he was considered a project by people. Mm-hmm. I don't know where he was in the rankings.
Top 100 kid out of St. Mary's.
Yeah, I mean, right. But you know, as much as people talked about Lute having an eye for talent, and he did, what he really had an eye for was people and getting the right type of people. And he probably had, you know, 10 or 12 boxes he liked to check, but the tops of those boxes were, look, competitiveness. He got people that could compete. He got winners. He got good guys. He got guys that played hard and were good teammates. And I think when you kind of combine that, you know, those ingredients, that's the recipe that you saw with his teams.
What another fact that I think is really unique about Coach Olson is, and again, people look at it now and people get so caught up with rankings, you know, who all that. The one thing about him is, yeah, you mentioned Craig McMillan, McDonald's All-American. You mentioned Sean, obviously a McDonald's All-American out of Tucson that's rare air right there. Yeah. And Bibby, who, if you lived in Tucson in the 90s, I can't really explain to you the hype that was Mike Bibby coming in here. But when you look at it, though, Matt, I would make the case that the entire backbone, not the entire backbone, but a good percentage of the vertebrae, how about that, was the guys The guys like Damon Stoudemire, regional recruit.
Right.
Jason Terry, regional recruit. Miles Simon, not quite good enough, they viewed, to get into UCLA. Guys like that. I mean, you look up at the banners right there, or excuse me, the retired numbers. Yeah, Elliott, big-time recruit. Bibby, big-time recruit. Gardner. But then you got Miles, you got JT. You've got other guys in there that were not the top-level type players, and he turned them into guys that made over $100 million in some cases.
Yeah, his ability to develop players was off the charts. And what I remember is talking to like NBA scouts, and they would say that every time they got an Arizona player, they were amazed at how much further they were along the development as these other players coming out. Whether it was, again, as you mentioned, a Mike Bibby or a Judd Bushler, a guy that was sort of a
volleyball player,
Steve Kerr, late second round pick. But he taught guys how to play, and he taught them to play at a high level. And the other thing that I've said a million times, so you've probably heard this before, is, he taught guys fundamentals, but at the same time, he let guys go. I mean, he was not afraid to just. I mean, we had his memorial celebration yesterday, and Coach Roz jokingly referred to, "Oh, here was Lute's coaching, take him." That was one of his. And when he said that, Kenny Lofton turned to me. He was sitting right behind me, and he said, "6 call." That was the 6 call for Sean Elliott. And we would run this clear out. And like I said, here's a fundamental coach, but he's literally running an NBA clear out because he knows how good Sean is. And we would run it around. Sean would get it on the left wing. We all cleared out. And Lute's words were "take him." I mean, so that's pretty awesome to have a coach with that kind of ability to be fundamental, but then open it up.
I've got a story that kind of dovetails into that. This was back, because practice used to be open, and talked about the communal feel. I mean, you could literally walk into McHale on a 2:30 sometimes, and you could see them playing. But this was back in the 1993-94 season, the Final Four year. And, because better than anybody, when there was practice going on, coach would split up the teams. He would a lot of times sit in the middle, and you would have like either Roz or Jesse Evans or Phil Johnson, whatever, KO perhaps,
right.
Coaching. And so I can't remember exactly why, but Damon Stoudemire and Khalid Reeves were going at each other. Khalid was actually running the point. Obviously, he was a shooting guard, but he was running the point in practice. He gets the ball to half court, and they're scrimmaging. And he looks over at Jesse Evans, and Olson stops the practice immediately. And I'm looking around, I'm like, Khalid didn't miss a shot. Khalid didn't turn it over. And everybody's waiting, and coach takes about 30 seconds to get down to the court. And then he goes over to Khalid, and he says, "Khalid, if you're having to look over for a play call right now, then I've done a very bad job coaching you at this point." He's talking to a guy who was the leading single-season scorer in school history that year, someone who is an all-time great. And it was just amazing. And it was something that stuck with me, 26, 27 years later, that he's stopping practice because Khalid Reeves, an All-American, looks over to Jesse Evans for a play call. But that's what you're talking about. That was the free-flowing type environment that he had there, Matt.
Yeah, it really was. And by the way, nice KO reference. It took you about 5 minutes.
I'll be getting him on for sure.
I appreciate the KO reference. We have some more of those. No, I mean it was fun to play for him. It was fun to play in those games. I mean, I remember even in the early 90s when we had what they called the Tucson skyline, right? We had Rooks and Stokes and Brian Williams. We still were scoring 100 points. And I laugh now because we go to some of the games and they used to have those, the little deal where if we scored in my era, it was if we scored 100, everybody got free pizza, I think it was. And so people would start chanting pizza, around.
And then they switched it to tacos after to make it cheaper because you guys were scoring 100 points.
It was happening so often. But then I remember, you go to some places, you go to like away games. I've been to away games, honestly, Mike, where if the team scores 80, they get free pizza or tacos or whatever it is. And I mean, we were still scoring in the 90s and 100s, even with a big, strong team where we threw it inside a lot. But I remember him. I can hear it in my ears when we would get a defensive rebound, him yelling, "Go," and run. And everybody had to run.
And what's amazing, too, you talk about the Tucson skyline, and this is what's cool about talking with a guy like Matt, is that we can basically go all over the outline right here. What's fascinating about that is there were so many different incarnations of Lute. He comes back and, people talk a lot of times about, the first round exits, and he came back and he said, you know what, we need to be a little bit more guard oriented. And so what happens is literally he starts transitioning, and, it's kind of weird that it happened, but you go from the Damon Stoudemire, Chris Mills, Khalid Reeves team, and then within 3 years, you've got basically a core four. And again, I don't want to minimize what AJ Bramlett and Bennett Davison and all those guys did, but you had a core four of perimeter guys in Mike Bibby, Jason Terry, Michael Dickerson, and Miles Simon that, in my opinion, Matt, is the best perimeter college basketball has ever seen. And here's why. And here's my only take. You've got 3 guys who were consensus first team AP All-Americans at some point, in Mike Bibby, Miles Simon, Jason Terry. And oh, by the way, the fourth wheel, Michael Dickerson, is a third team All-American. That's how he was able to transition stuff so quickly, Matt.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he was not afraid to do different things with his teams. And you mentioned that team. I remember being at the 94 Final Four, and that was kind of the start of it, where he really let, Damon and Khalid do a lot of stuff. And, nowadays, like if you watch Tommy Lloyd's team this year, they'll run a lot of pick and roll, right? High ball screens. That's what college basketball, pro basketball is today. When I first got to Arizona, we might run a high ball screen once a game. And I'm serious about that, once a game. But we had it in our playbook. So we would run it at times. If Lute felt like there was a way to take an advantage, he would run it. But I remember when he did have Khalid and Damon in that 94 season, all of a sudden they started using, it was our 2 and 3 call. And he's running 2 and 3 all the time with Damon and Khalid. And then he kept that going, as you said, when he went kind of all guards. And to some degree, the lineup he had in 97 when they won it all, you look back at that Kansas team that had an unbelievable front line of LaFrance and Pollard, not to mention Pierce at the 3, Hall of Fame.
Jacques Vaughn at the 1, and
Jacques Vaughn. I mean, I think they had at that time the second best team in college history behind the 91 Vegas team.
I agree.
But, for him to, like you said, spread it out, play all guards, but the key was, as I said, like that's what teams do now. But the key was being able to have a guy like Bennett Davison and AJ Bramlett play the 4 and the 5, be able to guard everybody, and athletic guys. And you think about it, when you think of, to me, the foundation of Lute and U of A basketball was Pete Williams. You go all the way back.
Eddie Smith.
It was those 6'7", 6'8" guys that could play down low, but they could also run. And he would do that and then pair him with the guards. I mean, he was way ahead of his time, if you think about it.
Yeah, and what Matt mentioned here is that, Arizona generally win over 80 points, and if DraftKings was around back then, you'd want to hop in on that over and under right there, because
taking the over all day long.
Taking the over on that, and that's what's cool about DraftKings. You can go in there. There's all different kinds of lines, and oh, by the way, right now, you've got a $200 free play once you put in $1 on an NFL game. Now, you might want to be the opposite of what I do, because what I did is I told everybody that I thought Arizona football was going to beat San Diego State, and they were down 21-0 within about 7 minutes. So if you do want to make some money, maybe go in with what Mike Luke says and maybe go with the opposite way, because let's be honest here, I could probably make you some money either way right there.
Costanza? Did you say go Costanza, go opposite?
Matt, that's exactly what I'm saying right here. I mean, my reputation precedes me at this point. I mean, it was some pretty impressive work that I did. But again, DraftKings is easy to get to. It's easy to navigate. And you know what? If you do have a little bit of a gambling issue, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP and they can get you working there. And the cool thing about being on PHNX is I'm going to be having guys like Matt Muehlebach, Kevin O'Neill. And you know what? If you're on the YouTube right now, just make sure that you download any of the all of the AZ Wildcats on podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or you know what? You can go to the site PHNX Sports and subscribe. We got a lot of really good stuff going on there. All right, Matt. So we talk about Lute Olson, and I think something that's interesting is you look at, and again, we talked about this on the phone a little bit. I don't want to minimize what Roy Williams has done because he's a top 10 all-time coach. That's indisputable. But I think what's impressive, though, about what Lute did as opposed to maybe a guy like a Roy Williams, where you're coaching in blue bloods, which, you got a little bit of an inherent advantage. Lute goes from Iowa, where he wins a Final Four, to Arizona, which, again, under Fred Snowden, you had some good teams, no doubt. But it wasn't an empire. Lute built an empire off a team that was coming off a 4-win season there, Matt, in a place that, let's be honest, Sean Elliott notwithstanding, didn't have a lot of local talent to be able to pull from.
Yeah, you think about it and you're like, what the heck was Lute thinking?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Why did he leave Iowa? He had just been to the Final Four. He was on the verge of another Final Four at Iowa. He had the city going crazy. He had that, as you just mentioned, but the lack maybe in Tucson of the huge talent pool. He's in the Midwest where he could go anywhere. He could probably drive 4 hours and get to 100 kids.
You got Indiana, you got Michigan, you got all those, right?
So what the heck was he thinking? And then he comes out here, by the way, and he calls his shot. He basically went Babe Ruth on everybody and said, look, the story's legend at this point. He went to every business, fraternity, sorority, and said, you better buy your tickets. They're going to be gone fast. We're going to light it up here. We're going to kill it. I have no idea how he saw that vision, how he saw it, and it happened. And by the way, it happened in 5 years. He was in the Final Four in 5 years,
right? With
a team that was 1-17. And I know, look, I know football's different. You need a lot more players. Basketball, you can probably get 2-3 guys, and you got a chance to make a good run. But think about a team that is dead last in the conference in the Pac-12, making the Rose Bowl in 5 years. It's right. You can't even imagine it.
I think a big part of it too is when you watched Lute, and I think it was, and Jay Billis was talking about this. He obviously didn't end up going to Arizona. He ended up going to Duke. But Jay Billis was talking about Lute, and he said, I was captured by the Duke allure, but I will tell you one thing. The class with which Lute recruited me, the kind of regal, pristine, vintage, cut out of a modeling magazine type. Right. He's like, my parents wanted me to go to Arizona. I can't even imagine what it was like. So tell me, and I've segued that. Tell me a little bit about when Lute was recruiting you. What was that like?
Well, it was interesting because KO, our buddy Kevin O'Neill, was the lead assistant in that, and he was crazy in a good way. I loved KO. And then you had Lute, which was just the opposite. He was just this super buttoned up, didn't cuss, was George Clooney with basically gray hair. I mean, just had
very well put.
The movie star looks. He was smooth. Lute was actually a bit shy. He was not an outgoing person per se. But I'll tell you I've been asked this when he came into my house. Like I had guys like Larry Brown come in and Mike Montgomery and a lot of good coaches came in, but there was no one that had the presence that Lute had. He was first of all a big man. We mentioned the good looks.
People don't know he was literally, what was he, 6'6", Matt?
He was 6'5"-ish, but right. Big and strong and just had this presence and aura about him that right away, like if you talk to my mom and dad who were in the who were there in the visit, just it was unlike anybody else. And that was the key for me. And part of that too, as I said, not a naturally outgoing guy, but a guy with a ton of confidence. He knew what he was going to do. He had the confidence to do it. And he was kind of, he was different than a lot of coaches said, I'm going to get you in. We're going to, get you playing time right away. He was like, no, like we're going to kill it. We're going to the Final Four. Do you want to be part of this? And it was almost like a great salesman where like I'm asking him to be part of the team, like I wanted to be part of it. And he just had a way about him that and that's why he got so many good players.
And John Wooden, who obviously had many of the same qualities that Lute Olson did, I thought paid Lute Olson the best compliment when they asked. He was asked this, and I want to say this was in the late '90s, and I'm paraphrasing here, but John Wooden was asked about Lute Olson and carrying on the Pac-10 legacy, and John Wooden said, "I can't think of a man that I'm prouder to be a friend of than Lute Olson." And you're talking John Wooden, arguably the greatest coach in any sport ever, talking about the Arizona basketball coach. And I'll tell you one thing, Matt, it wasn't just, window dressing. He wasn't just saying that. He meant that.
Yeah, he really did. I mean, and you'd have to say Lute is the modern day John Wooden for the Pac-10, for the Pac-10, Pac-12. And I remember them, Mike, as a freshman, sophomore, we'd go to play in Pauley. And I remember looking over in the layup lines, and John Wooden would come down from the stands. Him and Lute would talk. There was this big difference in height. But I took like a mental picture of that in my mind, and I thought, this is going to be something I'll remember for the rest of my life, seeing this incredible legend before the legend of Lute, and seeing those guys talk. And I think you mentioned something, though, and that is Lute just did it the right way. And, he did it with class. He did it with integrity. We had this memorial service, and because of COVID, it was kind of hard to plan some things. There was, it was a little bit late in the planning, but I called, we were able to get you saw some of the video that we put out before the ceremony this Sunday, and it was Roy Williams. Right. It was Jay Billis. It was Mike Montgomery. Sean, obviously, Elliott couldn't make it, so he had his video. I mean, people like Billis. I sent Billis a text 5 days before this memorial. I mean, with no context, by the way. Right. I said, hey, Jay, I know this is way late notice, but we're trying to get some video of some people for Coach Olson for this Sunday. I mean, and like within 5 seconds, I had a text back, you got it. And I was, and
that's not even a guy that played for him.
He didn't even play for him, right? I mean, he just he's covered him and knows him, and as he said, his mom loved him on the visit. I think it was down to Iowa and Duke, but that's the kind of guy that I think just the way people respect him. Yeah, and when I think about it, we got a quick read here but coming up, but I want to talk a little bit too coming up about how good Arizona was at its peak. And one thing about it too is if you want to bet coming up here, DraftKings is the place to go. You got the free $1 bet, PHNX code word. You get $200 free play. And you know what? You got college basketball coming up. I don't know exactly what the over-under in Arizona wins are going to be. I do think that Arizona is going to be a little bit better than people think. So maybe go against what I'm going to say right there. I'm impressed by Tommy Lloyd. You're a Chiefs guy, right, Matt? Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, if you wanted to get on that online, or if you want to get on that live betting yesterday, which I thought about doing when the Chiefs were at basically about plus 630 to win that game, you could have come away with some real good money there at DraftKings. Again, put in code word PHNX, you get a free $200 play. And you know what? If you got a little bit of an issue going on there, you can also go and you can go to 1-800 next step, and they're going to be able to help you out right there. All right, Matt. From 1990, I consider, when it comes to Lute Olson, I consider the apex of Arizona basketball essentially about 88 to 03. I think, I think after 03, things, age kind of steps in a little bit. The roster was a little bit more, in flux. But from 88 to 03, Arizona, along with North Carolina, Duke, Kentucky, and Kansas, those were the 5 best programs in college basketball by any measure. And you've got 4 schools right there that, with the exception of UCLA, are the 5 blue bloods in college basketball. And what he was able to do from in that window, Matt, you've got 4 Final Fours. You got a national championship. You got a runner-up. Basically, every point guard, most point guards that he had went on to be lottery picks, from Bibby to Terry, Damon Stoudemire. It was just a sexy place to be. And he made it there. The fact that Arizona's in with Kansas, North Carolina, and all those other schools is really something that I didn't really appreciate at the time because I was young. But you look back at it, and it really is amazing what he was able to do in that window.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, during that period you mentioned, I think, when October 15th started, which was the first day of practice, and the first day of the NCAA tournament started in March, I think every one of those teams could have won the title. Every one. Mm-hmm. And I will say this, I'll just carve out this 30 seconds to say this. And I'm not afraid to, point it out. I think one of the one things that I feel bad about for Coach Olson is that, at the time he and one of the 2 or 3 or 4 of those teams didn't win another title. Because I
Right.
felt, like I said, that's 15, 16 years of having a chance. You're like one of the top 10 teams. You're one of the top 5 that really could have won a title each and every one of those years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I said, it's not something I like regret terribly or anything, but I think, for how good we were in those teams, you really felt like you could have come away with 3 or 4 titles. We had one, the
Mm-hmm.
97 team, and that was to some degree the one that you thought, going into it wasn't going to be the team.
It was going to be next year.
It was going to be the next year. You look at that 01 team. I think you and I have always thought the 01 team might be the best, most talented team ever, with Gardner and Gilbert Arenas and Richard Jefferson.
That was the most perfectly constructed team that you could ever really come across. You had the tough as nails point guard in Jason Gardner. You had the everything scorer in Gilbert Arenas. You had Richard, who is one of the more unselfish stars in school history. The guy averaged 10, 11 points a game.
Isn't that crazy?
I mean, you look at it. If you were just to look at Richard's stats, you'd think to yourself, okay, whatever.
Not a lottery pick, right?
Yeah, not a lottery pick, but you know what? Generally, the cream rises to the top. And in that game against Duke, he, along with Lauren Woods, were the 2 best players for Arizona in that game. Then you got Michael Wright, the bruising forward, Lauren Woods, the shot blocker. But he was able to mix and match. And there was always kind of a unique flair to his roster. That was really the first one, though, that I thought checked off every single box in a very dynamic way. And I think the best way you could put that is you had 5 guys that were on the preseason top 50 Wooden Award list.
And how about Luke Walton was the 6th man?
As the 6th man, exactly. You got a 10-year pro.
Yeah. Yeah, and Ricky Anderson was like a Dunleavy type player, very good player.
Right,
he was the 7th guy coming in off the bench.
I think he was redshirting that year because remember he played 2 years, I think, then redshirted yeah. But you got him on the roster. The point's still well taken. I think when you got a guy like Lamont Frazier who was a solid player and he's scratching to get minutes. I mean, that really goes to show you where they were at. Now, my question for you is this: looking at it now, I still think that it's impossible to really understand what Lute Olson's meaning was for this school. And I don't think people will ever properly get it because still Arizona has not been to a Final Four in 20 years, which is crazy to say. A lot of Elite Eight, so it's not like Arizona's been in the dumps. But when I was growing up, basically, I felt it was like my rite of passage. Every 4 years, we play in the Final Four. Right. But even to this day, Matt, when you ask an Arizona fan or a college athletics fan about Arizona, the first thing that they're going to bring up is Arizona basketball. And that's something, along with the fan base, that 100% is due to Lute Olson.
Yeah, I go back to my original comments, the branding that Lute created, the identity. As you said, it was a sexy team back then. It was, in McHale, we haven't talked about McHale and the fans here. That era, and you were here, Mike. I mean, you saw games. It was, being in McHale at that time was magic. It really was. It was. I mean, everyone knows my story. I never lost for 4 years. I mean, you think about going to a game, and every time the fans show up, they go home a winner. You go home with a W. And how just unbelievable that is. And for 15 straight years, 16 years, it was just, I think about those games. I'll tell you, for me, the 2 things I probably miss the most about basketball are just, the guys in the competition practice. I miss practice. I just miss being around people and competing, being in those really tough practices. Lute when we would lose, he was unbelievably tough on us.
Right.
And we just had some practices where we went at it. Guys were wanting to fight, all the time. But the other thing I miss, certainly the games, but it's those late Saturday afternoon in Tucson, 2:00 game, CBS, UCLA, Arizona. I mean,
Billy Packer and Vern Lundquist on the call.
I have chills thinking about it, and it's, and McHale was just, and the fans knew, when to bring it. And they brought it in those big games, and the atmosphere there's unlike anything else.
I still think back, and honestly, during the Lute era, and again, it was basically from the Chris Mills team on that I caught every single game. So that's basically what my frame of reference is as far as living it. And The only time that I ever felt that Arizona was going against teams that had more talent in the conference were those mid-90s UCLA Jim Herrick teams. Those were the only teams. And I'll tell you what, Matt, I think about it to this day. I was so nervous for every single one of those games. And like when Arizona played Stanford, Stanford was always really good, but I always felt that Arizona had better players, which I think they did. I think that's fair to say.
I agree with that.
Those UCLA teams where you had all the O'Bannons and Toby Bailey and Tyus Edney, McCoy, those were the only times during that reign where I'm like, they might have better players. And Lute still got them from time to time, which is still amazing. And Herrick, for all of his issues, was a really, really good coach still.
He was a really good coach. He got great players. You know, I remember when I was playing like 90, 91, and then when I left, and then in 92, there would be at times literally every single person on the court was an NBA player. Yeah. Every person. And you can look it up, you know, like I remember in 91, I think I was the only starter out of our starters in UCLA, 10 players that did not play in the NBA. I was the only one.
Matt, let's not minimize it. How many of those guys, though, had the first triple-double in school history? Seriously.
That's true. That's right.
You ever talk to Sean Elliott and say, hey, dude, could you step your game up a little bit like me?
I know. Of all the people that would get a triple-double, in fact, I remember like Sean is the legitimate, like he would be the guy, right? I mean,
for sure.
He was sort of like a younger kind of Kobe Bryant that did everything, passed it, shot it, you know, got to the
defend long, just looked different than everyone else.
Yeah, 6'8" point forward. But no, those, you know, you mentioned back to the UCLA games, you were nervous. I was nervous for those. and I remember, you know, we would get into those games and the energy was so off the charts that, you know, we would always have the first time out after, you know, under the 16-minute mark. And the pace was so incredible for the first 4 or 5 minutes. And something with the ball got out of bounds, the horn sounds, and it's a TV timeout. And I remember thinking that it would happen all the time. I would look up and say, I have no idea what the score is. It could be 30-2. I wouldn't even know who was winning.
It was so riveting.
It was so riveting that the energy was so incredible. It's just, like I said, those are the things I miss that piece of it a lot.
All right. The cool thing about this is that I'm going to be able to have some guys like Matt and Kevin O'Neill on. So if you like what you've been hearing here, you should go subscribe on the podcast, AZ Wildcats podcast. You can go on PHNX.com and, you know, get a membership. There's going to be a lot of really good stuff going on here. And Matt, I can't thank you enough for coming on. This is honestly, I have chills talking about it just because of so many memory lanes that are going on. I really appreciate you, my man.
You're welcome. I enjoy bringing out the scrapbook as well. So it's a lot of fun talking about it.
Okay. For Matt Muehlebach, I'm Mike Luke.